The fundamental distinction between the era in which we live and every other one that has preceded it is the speed at which groundbreaking changes have occurred, changes which have altered the very bedrock of society from the ground up. The differences in technological change in the last 100 years have been greater than any prior. For the purposes of illustration, we can point to the Stone Age, with all its subcategories of Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Over 2.5 million years of, as the name implies, technology and advances based largely on stonework, which is to say, there was hardly any real fundamental change in technology stretching back from some of our earliest hominid ancestors to the majority of time that modern Homo sapiens has occupied the world stage. Contrast this with the difference between 1919 and 2019, and the list of changes is virtually endless. There are mechanical hearts that can do the job of normal hearts, liver transplants, birth control, mobile phones, machines we call airplanes, the internet, and far, far more. And these advances are so massive that, to paraphrase the words of the late great Arthur C. Clarke, they might as well be magic to the eyes and ears of our incredibly primitive ancestors, so much more advanced they are. All of this took place within a tiny span of 100 years, and it might be for this reason that we typically look at the past with a strange retrospective of singular categorization, whether it is the Stone Age or better documented historical periods. Take Rome, for example, and what historians refer to as the fall of Rome. In the most technical sense, the fall of Rome took place in the span of moments, when Romulus, the last of the Western Roman emperors, was deposed by Odoacer in 476 AD, who became the first barbarian ruler in the West, and marked the end of official Roman rule. But that is not how the fall of Rome is actually viewed by any competent historian, of course. If one were to take in the entirety of the fall of Rome, it would have to encompass some 4 centuries' time, and yet we frequently look at this slow erosion as a singular event, if only for the purposes of neat categorization. Whatever disputes may exist as to the specific factors that led to the fall of Rome and the nitty-gritty details, there still exists broad consensus as to what general factors were, which could be briefly summarized as foreign invasions, over-reliance on slave labor, political instability, and the dissection of Rome into East and West, among a few others. The relatively long period of time that was required for all of this to take place allows us who dwell in the present to offer probable accounts as to what had happened to lead to the fall. We are fortunate to have the benefit of hindsight when examining historical events, and we often, for the sake of convenience, compress such events into neat categories. I mention this precisely because of the twofold benefit we have. One, that these events lie in the past, and two, the developments typically unfold over large expanses of time. The second factor is even more salient, as it pertains to technological developments, as mentioned earlier, with the unbelievably slow advances of the Stone Age, something we'll come back to later. Our relative distance from historical events, and our ability to understand general cause and effect of said events retrospectively, whatever disputes might exist concerning them, creates a methodology for understanding history. The temporal distance removes us from the events in question, curtailing at least some biases that might otherwise surface were we the actors or the ones involved. The sluggishness of the pace of events gives us time to appropriately organize our thoughts and piece together otherwise difficult to comprehend human concatenations. And lastly, the languid pace of most of human history allows us to analyze it paradigmatically and observe patterns that seem to repeat themselves, whence the phrase, history repeats itself, stems. And there is some truth to it. It is not just history that repeats itself, it is the relative constancy of human nature, above all, its limitations, that allow us to make this observation. The tedium of all this would be that human progress has been historically and prehistorically relatively static, and this grants us an ability to analyze matters with relative precision and accuracy and create paradigms that serve to facilitate broader understanding of human behavior. But, as true as this might be, and I do think there is more than some truth to it, otherwise I would not have mentioned, of course, it can lead us astray in several important ways. The era in which we live is one of incredible progress in terms of technology and science, and its chief distinction is the rapidity at which most developments have occurred. Unlike the Middle Ages, which only saw exceptionally slow change by way of comparison, the past 50 years have seen greater transformation than any before, and it is here that our reliance on distinct and repetitive lessons from history, which inform our paradigms, begins to crumble. Under any other circumstance, it would have been quite normal to extrapolate from history and previous events in an attempt to form an overview of those in the present. But circumstances have changed a great deal, and we no longer live in a period of relative continuity, which could be descriptive of most of human history, with its small and incremental shifts in social structure, technology, and progress. There is still continuity in the sense that we are still very much dealing with human beings, but that is unremarkable, as human beings have remained the only constant here. What is interesting and remarkable is how environmental shifts alter human behavior and human reactivity. One of the increasingly common reactions to concerns people voice about a world with rapid technological change is to cite the free market as being flexible enough to deal with any challenge that might be thrown its way. True to form, and as mentioned above, adherence to the idea that the free market will robustly weather the storm of future challenges will cite the Industrial Revolution as the appropriate historical paradigm to examine. The key claim to be extracted here is the notion that innovation will create new jobs, and that the developments of the Industrial Revolution were such that those sufficiently adaptable transitioned over to new occupations, or in some cases continued their previous occupations, albeit in new form or with new tools. Markets, as such, are the training grounds for such innovation, and the claim is, on its own, not false. New innovations can and do create new opportunities, but relying on previous paradigms, as we are wont to, can be misleading, though more often than not, the Industrial Revolution can be seen as a vindication of the free market because we seemingly emerge unscathed from its consequences, and I would emphasize seemingly. Before proceeding, I do wish to communicate that none of this is actually meant as a dig at free market principles or capitalism, but rather I wish to make use of a common and popular perspective of viewing human interactions that itself makes use of historical paradigms to illustrate why and how it actually might not be as simple as is claimed. Furthermore, there are too many people that wed themselves to unshakable positions that never change despite reasonable objections and new evidence adduced. And thus far concerning the matter of historical reactivity, the notion of free markets strikes me as the most orthodox position represented when concerns about the future are raised. When encountering the unknown, it is often difficult to guesstimate what impact that unknown may have, but we can look at past paradigms to extract useful information and simultaneously be discerning enough to recognize when historical paradigms cease to be applicable, or at least in part. Let us take a simple example of the farmer who formerly made use of oxen and horses to perform his work in the field, but due to emergent technology at the time, was forced, for better or worse, to transition over to a tractor in order to stay competitive with other farmers who had adopted this very same technology. As this sort of example is typical when the market will save us mentality is brought to bear. And here it is very important to note that despite the fact that there was a transition, the transition itself was not highly demanding. Still more relevant, it is unlikely that plowing the field with a tractor is cognitively more demanding than doing the same work with oxen or horses, at least significantly so, something that, were tractors to require greater mental commitment, would have drastically hampered the transition from one to the other. And here we come to the crux of the matter, and really, the entire point of the video. Historical paradigms are not like for like, and the assumption that they are is largely predicated on recurrent patterns of the past that only occurred because of a relative uniformity of technology and development and the reliable constancy of human nature interacting with a slow-paced world. When I interact with someone and raise the topic of, say, gene editing, AI, or plain and simple automation, the only response that is forthcoming, and I can assure you that this is typical and common, is that the free market will solve it because new opportunities will present themselves with new innovations, and it will trickle down to us all, including the lowest rung of the ladder. There's not much left to discuss. Here's an example of something absolutely unprecedented in the history of mankind, something that will not be solved by referring to past paradigms, and something that might be exacerbated by the free market, in fact. We can already edit genes via CRISPR-Cas9 technology. CRISPR stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. CRISPR spacer sequences are transcribed into short RNA sequences capable of guiding the system to matching sequences of DNA. When the target DNA is found, Cas9, one of the enzymes produced by the CRISPR system, binds to the DNA and cuts it, shutting off the targeted gene. Using modified versions of Cas9, scientists can activate gene expression instead of cutting the DNA. Furthermore, CRISPR-Cas9 can be used to target and modify so-called genetic typos in the 3 billion letter sequence of the human genome in order to treat genetic disease. However, the idea that the ability to edit out and alter DNA sequences will only be limited to the treatment of disease is a supreme exercise in folly. Medically speaking, anabolic steroids exist to aid in combating wasting away and general muscular atrophy, but let's be honest, such drugs see as much use, if not more, outside of medicine, whether in professional sports or for recreational use. Inasmuch as gene editing technology such as CRISPR is released into private markets for use, we can be reasonably certain that it will be taken up by as many people as can afford it. The limitation of gene editing technology, the most prominent of which is CRISPR, though there are others, is simply a function of ignorance. By this I mean the following. One can only target DNA sequences whose functions are known, i.e., what effects they have on the human in question, whether disease or any other known trait. So the limiting factor is that of knowledge. Inasmuch as we improve our understanding of genetics, inevitably we will begin to understand the basis of complex behaviors and traits, most importantly intelligence. And there is a strong correlation between IQ, which is a proxy for intelligence, and wealth, meaning that if you are wealthy, particularly if you acquired your wealth through your own means, you are likely to be smart. This is something that typically sets smart people apart from average or dumb people. Now, by the lights of every conventional free market argument, as was, say, the case with mobile phones, it was the wealthy, and by way of correlation smart people, that got access to them first, and later they became available to other people as the prices went down. And let's assume that every emergent form of technology behaves this way, meaning that in the beginning it will be very expensive and available only to the wealthy, and that this pattern will repeat itself with gene editing. When the genes associated with intelligence are correctly identified, it will be the intelligent, wealthy people who first gain access to the technology, which will widen an already present gap. The fundamental difference to be illustrated here is that, unlike mobile phones, creating smarter, more capable human beings out of those who already fall to the right of the distribution curve may very well create gaps so large that the distance can never be closed. This is not an instance of just catching up, because even if such technology were made cheaply available within a decade's time or 2 decades' time, the differences that would ensue would be substantial. And relying on previous paradigm shifts will not help in this matter, because it is literally unprecedented in human history. I've heard arguments that raise education as a comparison, tractors, phones, computers, and the list might as well be endless. However, none of these arguments actually does justice to the profundity of the changes we are soon to experience, because gaps in intelligence also correlate with the ability to perform certain jobs. As mentioned before, moving from horse to tractor was not really a shift that required cognitive upgrades, but the global market is shifting. The running joke now, let them learn to code, is more applicable than ever, because a cognitive economy, as I call it, will render most people incapable of working in it, listless, without purpose, and in despair. And I have not even begun to talk about AI and automation, topics which I must admit merit videos on their own. I do not see a simple black and white solution to a likely massive problem of this sort, but reflexively falling back on past paradigms to both explain and then hope for solutions is surely not the answer to hitherto unseen challenges. Just wait, see, and react seems to have been the preferred means of dealing with most human problems throughout history, but we are in a rather unique position, we who occupy the temporal grounds of the early 21st century. We now know more about human biology, neurology, behavior, and general functioning than ever before, and yet we think nothing of the idea of applying that knowledge to the present and future. Politicians continue to spew forth the familiar cascade of doublespeak and lies to save the day in order to spite the morrow, with little to no attention paid to changes that will likely uproot the very foundations of what we have come to know as human society. What is necessary is honest, open, and real conversation about realities most people shy away from, realities that are only whispered in quote-unquote dark corners, away from public ears, and a full application of the most current state of human knowledge we have available. It's not perfect, but it's still better than anything we've ever had before. Our previous track record of reactivity must fundamentally be altered in order to be able to anticipate things just as much as we simply react to them, or at the very least make an attempt to do so. And of course, the usual culprits are guilty here: political correctness, lack of foresight, self-interest, and a host of other human weaknesses and foibles. We have a unique opportunity that none of our ancestors had, encapsulated in the state of our knowledge, in our understanding of the complex processes behind human behavior and its interactions with the environment. But instead of doing something with that, we forge ahead, not all that different from our ancestors, both recent and distant, intent on repeating the same passive reception of unfolding events that has characterized the entirety of humanity's existence. This is not simply the wheel, a tractor, or a mobile phone, for what is coming is bigger than anything we've ever seen before, and it is incumbent upon us both to act and react, more appropriately, to the best of our ability, rather than repeat the past, because we are too comfortable in our perceptions and paradigms that more likely than not will have little to no application to the future. Thank you very much for watching. As this channel operates off of the generosity and contributions of its subscribers, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Any and all support is more than appreciated. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.